David, you see President Biden walking to the podium right now. Let's listen.
Today, I made two vital calls, as I've been making for some months now. Two vital calls that on the situation in Russia and Ukraine. The first was to a bipartisan group of members of Congress who are currently representing the United States, along with Vice President Harris at the Munich Security Conference. The second was the latest in a series of calls over the past many months with the heads of state of our NATO allies and the European Union, to bring them up to date on what the United States thinks is the current state of affairs and what's likely to happen in Ukraine in the coming days, to ensure that we continue to remain in lockstep, that is, the European Union and NATO. Despite Russia's efforts to divide us at home and abroad, I can affirm that has not happened. The overwhelming message of on both calls was one of unity, determination, and resolve. I shared with all of those on the calls what we know about a rapidly escalating crisis in Ukraine. Over the last few days, we've seen reports of a major uptick in violations of the ceasefire by Russian-backed fighters attempting to provoke Ukraine and the Donbass. For example, a shelling of a Ukrainian kindergarten yesterday, which Russia has falsely asserted was carried out by Ukraine. We also continue to see more and more disinformation being pushed out to the Russian public, including Russian-backed separatists, claiming that Ukraine is planning to launch a massive offensive attack in the Donbass. Well, look, there is simply no evidence of these assertions, and it defies basic logic to believe the Ukrainians would choose this moment, with well over 150,000 troops arrayed on its borders, to escalate a year-long conflict. Russia's state media also continues to make phony allegations of a genocide taking place in the Donbass and push fabricated claims warning about Ukraine's attack on Russia without any evidence. That's just what I'm sure Ukraine's thinking of doing, attacking Russia. All of these are consistent with the playbook the Russians have used before, to set up a false justification to act against Ukraine. This is also in line with the pretext scenarios that the United States and our allies and partners have been warning about for weeks. Throughout these tense moments, the Ukrainian forces have shown great judgment and, I might add, restraint. They refused to allow the Russians to bait them into war. But the fact remains, Russian troops currently have Ukraine surrounded from Belarus along the Russian border and with Ukraine to the Black Sea in the south and all of its border. You know, look, we have reason to believe the Russian forces are planning to and intend to attack Ukraine in the coming week, in the coming days. We believe that they will target Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, a city of 2.8 million innocent people. We're calling out Russia's plans loudly and repeatedly, not because we want a conflict, but because we're doing everything in our power to remove any reason that Russia may give to justify invading Ukraine and prevent them from moving. Make no mistake, if Russia pursues its plans, it will be responsible for a catastrophic and needless war of choice. The United States and our allies are prepared to defend every inch of NATO territory from any threat to our collective security as well. We also will not send troops in to fight in Ukraine, but we will continue to support the Ukrainian people. This past year, the United States provided a record amount of security assistance to Ukraine to bolster its defensive, $650 million from Javelin missiles to ammunition. We also previously provided $500 million in humanitarian aid and economic support for Ukraine. And earlier this week, we also announced an additional sovereign loan guarantee of up to $1 billion to strengthen Ukraine's economic resilience. But the bottom line is this: the United States and our allies and partners will support the Ukrainian people. We will hold Russia accountable for its actions. The West is united and resolved. We're ready to impose severe sanctions on Russia if it further invades Ukraine. But I say again, Russia can still choose diplomacy. It is not too late to de-escalate and return to the negotiating table. Last night, Russia agreed that Secretary of State Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov should meet on February 24th. February 24th in Europe. But if Russia takes military action before that date, we'll be clear that they have slammed the door shut on diplomacy. They will have chosen war, and they will pay a steep price for doing so, not only from the sanctions that we and our allies will impose on Russia, but the moral outrage the rest of the world will visit upon them. You know, there are many issues that divide our nation and our world, but standing up to Russian aggression is not one of them. The American people are united. Europe is united. The transatlantic community is united. Our political parties in this country are united. The entire free world is united. Russia has a choice between war and all the suffering it will bring, or diplomacy that will make a future safer for everyone. Now, I'm happy to take a few questions. Nancy from Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, sir. Do you think that it is wise for President Zelensky to leave Ukraine if an invasion is as imminent as the U.S. says it is?
That's a judgment for him to make, and a determination as to whether or not. I've spoken with Zelensky a dozen times, maybe more, I don't know. And it's in the pursuit of a diplomatic solution, it may not be it may be the wise choice, but it's his decision.
And do you have any indication about whether President Putin has made a decision on whether to invade? Do you feel confident that he hasn't made that decision already?
As of this moment, I'm convinced he's made the decision. We have reason to believe that.
There seems to be a unanimity of spirit between the United States and Europe to do some sanctions, a comprehensive sanctions, but is everyone on board with the exact same sanctions that you want to do?
Yes. There will be some slight differences, but none. There'll be more add-ons than subtractions.
And President Putin is going to oversee some nuclear drills this weekend. How do you see that happening? What's your reaction to that, sir? Thank you.
Well, I don't think he is remotely contemplating using nuclear weapons, but I do think I think he is focused on trying to convince the world that he has the ability to change the dynamics in Europe in a way that he cannot. But I don't. How much of it is a cover for just saying we're just doing exercises, and there's more than that? I just can't. It's hard to read his mind.
Mr. President, to be clear, you are convinced that President Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Is that what you just said a few moments ago?
Yes, I did. Yes.
So is diplomacy off the table then?
No. Until he does, diplomacy is always a possibility.
What reason do you have to believe he's considering that option at all?
We have a significant intelligence capability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
An extraordinary news conference as President Biden addresses the country and warns that the United States now has a reason to believe that Russian President Vladimir Putin has made the decision to go ahead with an invasion, an attack on Ukraine. He said, we have reason to believe, and this would be a catastrophic war of choice by Vladimir Putin, emphasizing that there still is at least the hope for diplomacy. But if Russia moves with any kind of aggression in the next few days, diplomacy will be off the table. And that upcoming meeting with the Secretary of State and Russia's top diplomat will not happen. The one is currently scheduled. I want to go now to national security correspondent David Martin, who is standing by at the Pentagon. David, a lot of really incredible information to be sharing publicly information that the president says is really disinformation about what Russia is already doing to lay the groundwork for an invasion. And he is making clear that they are publicizing this because it is part of a Russian strategy to destabilize the country. David, I know from the sources I talked to, they really describe this as phase one of the attack. In other words, it's already underway.
Another way of putting it, Margaret, is that we are witnessing the beginning of Vladimir Putin's endgame in Ukraine. We can call these false flag operations and disinformation, but we're not the people he's trying to convince. He's trying to convince his own population that there is a crisis in Ukraine, that this fire he set, he now has to go in and put out. And we've seen him preparing for it for weeks. Now the president, and what is certainly the major news out of that appearance, says that the U.S. has reason to believe he has decided to invade. So now the questions are, what form will that invasion take, and when will it happen? Every indication is that it will take place in a matter of days, and that it will be significant in size. A defense official told us here at the Pentagon earlier today that 40 to 50% of those 150,000 Russian troops arrayed around the border with Ukraine have now moved into attack positions. That means that they're in assault formations anywhere from 5 to 30 miles back from the border, just waiting for the order to go, and they could be up at the border inside half an hour, and then a full-scale invasion could begin.
And David, I know in my reporting, I continue to hear Vladimir Putin, as a strategist, gives himself many options. So we know some kind of attack, further attack, may be coming based on what the president just laid out, that he not only believes but has intelligence that leads him to come to this conclusion that something will happen. What would an attack look like?
Well, the real short answer is whatever it takes to bring Ukraine into his sphere of influence. But a full-scale invasion would start with cyber attacks and electronic warfare to take out Ukraine's command and control networks, be followed by air and missile strikes to destroy their key leadership installations. Then you would have commando raids to assassinate senior government leaders, to seize TV and radio stations, airborne operations to seize airfields and bridges. Then the forces arrayed along the border would come rolling across in tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and take down the country. Major cities, including the capital of Kyiv, would be targets. The Ukrainian military would try to fight, but they would be very quickly reduced to pockets of resistance and last maybe 10 to 15 days.
Just 10 to 15 days, fairly dire assessment there. And I know the forces have surrounded the country. I want to go to Ukraine right now, where we find foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who is in the capital of Kyiv. And as we heard, Charlie, the capital city itself may be targeted in the coming days.
Yes, and you know, the concern here, the tensions here have absolutely been ratcheting in the past 48 hours, mostly centering around that Donbass region. But as you pointed out, you know, this is an area that's not only controlled by these Russian-backed separatists, but they control the images and the information that's coming out of there. And the information that we've seen today, the images are of an explosion of a car outside rebel headquarters. Those are the images that we saw. People that have been packed onto buses. Elderly women, children, who have been told by these Russian separatists to head to Russia for their own safety, because they're being told that the Ukrainian military is about to invade that area. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry said today, in order to reassure their own people in that region, this is patently false. We have no intention of doing that. At the same time, there has been an escalation in violence between both sides, and independent observers have noted this. So there has been a ratcheting up of tension and fighting in that region anyway. But the information that we're getting from these Russian-backed separatists, we just have to take with a pinch of salt.